Seeing as it's almost Valentine's Day, I thought I'd do a special video for you all. February 14th, a day of love and romance. Valentine's cards, romantic dinners, Cupid. Well, unfortunately for these 7 men, it just wasn't in the cards. On this particular Valentine's Day, back in 1929 at a little garage in Chicago, Illinois, all these men were found dead. Executed, to be exact. Shot repeatedly with Thompson submachine guns. What happened here will be forever known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. After the shooting, all that could be heard was a dog's constant howling and crying coming from inside the garage. The landlady of the building next door went to see what all the commotion was, and that's where she found the bodies. The police knew that the murdered men all belonged to the North Side Irish gang, run by George Bugs Moran. His brother-in-law and second in command, Albert Kachelik, his alias was James Clark. His 2 enforcers and occasional hitmen, Peter and Frank Gusenberg. Albert Weinshank managed several of Moran's businesses. Adam Hayer was the gang's bookkeeper. Johnny May, he was the mechanic who worked for the gang. He happened to be working on a car at the time. And Reinhard Schwimmer, an optician who just liked to hang out with the gangsters. When the police arrived, Frank Gusenberg was still alive, despite being shot about 14 times. The police asked Frank who shot him. He replied, "No one, nobody shot me." He was rushed to the hospital where he was asked again who shot him. His last words were before he died was, "I ain't no copper." The only survivor was Johnny May's dog, Highball. Now, there are 2 different stories about what happened to Highball after all this was said and done. One story was that he was adopted by one of the reporters covering the massacre. The other story was that the poor dog was so agitated and aggressive that he had to be put down. Sadly, the latter of the 2 is believed to be the true story. What the police found out was that on February 13th, Moran got a call about some bootleg whiskey and that was being delivered to the SMC garage on the 14th, Valentine's Day. So Moran sent some of his men to the warehouse, but he was running a bit late. Just as his car was coming up to the building, Moran noticed a car stop at the warehouse. 4 men, 2 of them in police officer uniforms, got out of the car. Thinking it was a raid, Moran drove past the building. It wasn't until later that day he would find out what really happened. The police believe that the men responsible were trying to kill Moran. It is also believed that the killers mistook one of the men in the garage for Moran himself, possibly Albert Weinshank. The 2 shared the same build and height. When Moran was questioned by the police about the murders, he told detectives that only one man could do this: Al Capone. Big Al. Public enemy number 1, Scarface. He started life as a gangster in New York, but moved to Chicago in his 20s. He eventually became the mob boss of the Chicago outfit in the south side of Chicago. Moran, with his North Side gang, started muscling in on some of Capone's not exactly legal business ventures. So it was easy for everyone to assume that Capone would want Moran out of the picture. It's not like the gangsters really need a reason to attack one another, but it's also believed that Moran had some of Capone's men killed a while back, and that too might have been a major reason for the assassination attempt. Witnesses told the police that after the shooting they saw 2 officers bring 2 other men out of the warehouse at gunpoint, put them in a black car, and then drive away. Even though Capone had a perfect alibi, he was in Miami at the time of the killings. It didn't matter. pretty much everyone believed he was the mastermind. Since the police figured out that Moran was stealing from Capone's liquor shipments, which were coming out of Detroit, they initially believed that the Purple Gang, or the Sugar House Gang as they were also known, was responsible. 3 of its members were picked out of a mugshot by a woman who claims to have rented a room to the men 10 days prior to the shooting. Lack of evidence meant that the gang members were all cleared. Police were called out to a garage fire on February 22 where a 1927 Cadillac was found, in pieces and burnt. Seems that the car caught fire while they were using a torch to dismantle it. This was believed to be the car used in the massacre. The police arrested several suspects, one of whom just happened to be really close with Capone, Jack Machine Gun McGurn. They believed that McGurn, along with John Scalise, Albert Anselmi, and Frank Rio, one of Capone's most loyal enforcers, were the ones responsible. Even though they were charged with the murders, McGurn had an alibi. John and Albert were later found dead, and there was no solid evidence to link Frank to any of it, so the police had to eventually drop the charges and they were back to square one. But then, in December, a man shot and killed patrolman Charles Scalise. The murderer abandoned his car and took off on foot. The police were able to trace back the car to one Fred Burke. He was going by the name Frederick Dane. When Burke's home was searched, the police found a bulletproof vest, stolen bonds from a Wisconsin bank valued at $320,000, 2 Thompson submachine guns, pistols, 2 shotguns, and thousands of rounds of ammo. Forensic ballistic testing was very new at the time, but it was able to prove that the bullets fired from the Tommy guns found in Fred Burke's residence matched the bullets removed from the bodies. Burke was captured in 1931 and was tried for murder of Officer Scalise, as that was the strongest case they had against him. He was convicted and given a life sentence. He died in prison on July 10, 1940. Al Capone eventually went to prison in 1932, but it was for tax evasion. He was released November 16, 1939, and died in 1947. And George Bugs Moran, one of Chicago's wealthiest gangsters, he died February 25, 1957 of lung cancer, in prison, broke. There are many theories by many different historians on who was responsible for the massacre, but no one knows for sure. As weird as it is, this is still considered to be an unsolved case, and will probably stay that way, even though everyone knows Al Capone was responsible. Thank you so much for watching this Valentine's Day special. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit that like button and then subscribe. Once again, I'm Rick, and I'll see you next time on The Unsolved.